Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Strategic Command World War I, and this is the West Front First campaign. If you haven't been following along, we also have a East Front First campaign, which I've sort of put on hiatus to at least mostly complete this, as well as a Ludendorff offensive, more a divisional scale, just West Front campaign series going for this game as well. Okay, it is time. Yes, time to give the Entente its turn. Okay, no, okay, I just saw. That's okay. Yes. Austria-Hungary develops ground attack weapons level 1 for the aircraft and develops mobility level 1. That helps, and we're getting our food for Ukraine. Good. And we're able to if they don't, I'm presuming, yeah, you got that up to 10. I expected that. Didn't want it, but expected it. Okay, a destroyer. An Italian destroyer is entering the Adriatic, it looks like. We have good weather. Maybe we can bomb it with our aircraft next turn. Yes, good interceptors. Do your job. Yep, 3 MPP. Oh well. Belgium did supply a lot of materiel support for Germany during World War I. The occupied parts. It was a significant thing. I'm trying to lower our morale. That could be useful to you, I could see. Oh, there's a light cruiser there. Question is, are they going to drop in troops instead of moving troops to the West Front? Well, building a solid line up here, looks like they are able to entrench. Accession of Kaiser Karl increases nationalist aspirations in Austria-Hungary. Okay, is a good thing. I don't know if it's good up there. France surrenders. Thank you, very loud motorcycle, for punctuating that. Central Powers liberate Morocco. Okay, Central Powers liberate Tunisia. Central Raiders disrupt Egypt convoys. German Commerce Raider Moet, I think that's Siegel, attacks trade from the British Empire. William Buffalo Bill Cody dies at age 70. Central Powers major victory. That is a nice photo. Okay, well, is there still a game to play here? I don't know if there is. Oh no, we don't. I don't think we even get to play anymore. Nope, the game is just over. We're just reviewing what happened. Now, had the French collapsed, because we were playing this the West Front first campaign, but had they collapsed while, say, Russia was still going at it, still really a thing, and maybe, I could readily see the idea of leaving the Eastern Front with sort of minimum units there and just really pounding hard, fast into France. And then having France collapse by losing Paris and possibly some other, or I presume take a few other strategic points, and the game continue. Because you could have a situation like this in which there is a lot of British forces in a place to be able to evacuate. My sense, this is interesting. Look at the naval setup. Okay. They've got a lot of stuff. I guess maybe hunting these guys still there. Wow, that's all solid. That's no longer solid, I think, because a lot of, again, these guys are over here, maybe. Because we could easily see a British Napoleonic strategy in which, they maintain naval supremacy, maybe actively sinking the German fleet that would come out after the fall of France. Now, the Battle of Jutland, however you want to pronounce it, out here during World War I by the Kriegsmarine and the home fleet of Britain, which I think was maybe mostly up here at Scapa Flow, I'm not sure, or wherever it was, but they got word that the fleet was sally forth. Then it was sort of a late attempt at breaking the strategic blockade of Germany through naval powers. And I guess my evaluation, based on all that, I've mostly watched documentaries on it. In a tactical sort of sense, who did more damage to who? Germany came off a little better than Britain. But the critical element is, strategically, Germany lost because Germany never went out again, and Britain maintained the naval blockade. So it clearly won in that sense. It won strategically, clearly. But also tactically, the British came off worse, had more damage, maybe a few more ships sunk, and I don't remember the details of it. But the British weren't defeated either. They didn't run away, let's go back, rearm, refuel, get better organized, then come back out, or anything like that. No, they were still there ready to fight, as far as I remember everything about it. So they weren't really even defeated tactically. Like I will readily admit and say, the Germans did more damage effectively to the British than they had on themselves. That's absolutely true. The German high seas fleet was competent. It was competent enough to go up against Britain. But there's a critical element lacking in Germany that was very much there with the Royal Navy. Definitely the Kaiser, and I think the Royal Naval Command absolutely knew that if their fleet got sunk, there was no way of replacing it. Not no way ever in time. You know, if going out there, having a big smash up, gets most of it sunk, and the troops march into Paris and, you know, march far enough east and Germany wins the war. Yeah, they could rebuild the fleet over time, but they knew that there was no way during the ongoing war that they were going to be able to build a replacement fleet. Just all that construction power and steel would be denied the front lines. And now they were building submarines pretty rapidly, pretty effectively, but that's still not the same as replacing the fleet. Now, on the other hand, Britain, through its naval strategy, significantly inherited from Nelson is they plan on using their fleet to destroy the enemy fleet. That is their plan. Now, they don't just have a fleet, they have fleets. Now, I do believe the fleet that was facing off Germany at this time was their premier, most modern, most effective fleet. But not that they would be happy, but they would find it quite acceptable if their fleet is on the bottom of the, Dogger Banks out here, so long as the German fleet is out there sitting on the bottom of the Dogger banks as well. You know, if they're both on the bottom of the sea, okay. You know, hopefully we've rescued, most of our sailors. Probably not, but they would at least hope that. But okay, because they are looking at we can't really zip around like we can at Hearts of Iron, but they've got a worldwide empire. They have a shipbuilding industry much more significant than Germany's. And although a lot of their shipbuilding industry may not lend itself to building, dreadnoughts, some of it obviously does. Now, again, if we jump back to Germany and like these big railway guns, Krupp, instead of building naval guns, were building, whether they're big super guns, the Paris gun to bombard Paris, or simply a lot of fairly large caliber guns to operate along the front lines. They're building those instead of naval guns. Britain is definitely building heavy artillery too, but I don't think is heavily focused on that. And even if it sort of is, and they're not able to build a huge number of new dreadnoughts, okay, the enemy's fleet isn't there either. But Britain can build destroyers, light cruisers, crank those suckers out, and put them to sea to protect trade. And that's the important element with Britain. So long as you eliminate the enemy's ability to use the sea, it's like, okay, that's the purpose of the fleet. Now, we'd like to have it back in good shape after doing that, but that's the purpose of the fleet. Where for Germany, you gotta look at this. Fleet good for what? Oh, yeah, our colonies out in the Pacific. We've got to be able to send reinforcements out there, all the way out there. So we're going to put a cocoon around some troop ships and supply ships, and we're all going to create a escort all the way out and around through the Atlantic, through the Indian Ocean, out to the Pacific, reinforce there, then all the way come back home. What? No, they're not going to do that. They might need ships to go, hey, to stand off against, whether it's the British or the French or the Portuguese or somebody else locally, not just like pirates like we might think, but go, yep, there's a German ship in the Indian Ocean, there's a colony, they got the Tanganyika out there, yeah, we've got to, we're escorting our trade. You can't just bully us around. We also have military force in the region. Yeah, some fleet is useful for Germany, but outside of that, fight the Swedes, fight the Russians. Okay, yeah. But a big fleet doesn't do them a lot of good. And so it's more of a prestige thing. And also a thing, I think, what do the two great empires have, France and Britain? The Kaiser and German politicians are looking around. Okay, they've got large fleets. Okay, so if you want an empire, you need a large fleet. So we build large fleet with never really understanding of how they're going to use it. Again, I'm not knocking the sailors or the captains of the vessels. They knew their jobs well. But geography, you're just not going to be able to use it, because you're just not going to be able to go, oh yeah, we're going to do trade convoys. They're going to leave here. They're going to come out here. They're going to come around through here, and they're going to sail over to neutral America, trade at Boston, New York, or somewhere like that. And then these big escorted convoys ready to take on the British High Seas Fleet are going to come all the way back here. That just ain't going to happen. Where the British that are escorting convoys are, at least mostly, not setting up to do that. They're setting up before the war really starts to stop, commerce raiders. Whether they're, converted merchantmen that are trying to look, sneaky, or whether they're just, fast light cruisers that do leave, out of these ports, sail out here and then, hang out as surface raiders out here in onesies, twosies, running around for a while, sinking ships. Then, of course, as submarines become more and more of a thing, they're looking at anti-submarine warfare. But and so Britain can do that. And that's the same thing that Britain, and that's why France has a navy, is because France has a Mediterranean coast that it wants to keep in contact with its Mediterranean, well, this is Algeria's sort of France and its other sort of possessions, and its Mediterranean trade. And it does, even as late as, beginning of World War One, for sure, obviously, have an overseas empire that is significant. They don't have Syria yet, but yeah, they've got a lot of places in Central Africa. Some they still have colonies out in South America. They've got colonial possessions, out in the Pacific and Asia, minor ones, relatively speaking, but still out there. There's a lot of trade. So they're looking at a fleet out here to sort of deal with the British fleet. And if both of their fleets sort of come, sink to the bottom, well, then their trade can continue as well, too. But just geography and the lack of German trade just makes it, not really a practical thing. And so, like, Britain really is concerned, and the other thing Britain needs its fleet, and why it focuses so much on it, is that's how it keeps from being defeated in the sense that invaded. You know, Germany can march into France, France can march into Germany. Neither of them can march into Britain. They have to sail into Britain. And so Britain realizes this, so they build fleets to deal with this. And I still remember, I think it's a reasonably accurate quote, though I've read it in historical fiction, but good stuff. I forget which head of the Admiralty it was, but during the Napoleonic Wars, when there was, an invasion scare, serious one, and he was at like some big ball or whatever, and he was being called away, because of the potential of the French fleet was out. And it was asked by someone, how is France going to be invading Britain? And he says, I don't know how, and this is not an exact quote, but a paraphrasing of it. I don't know how France is going to invade Britain, but I can assure you it will not be by sea. So yeah, he wasn't sure how France was going to invade Britain, but he absolutely knew it wasn't going to happen by sea. So this is the Napoleonic Wars. Balloons existed, so maybe this is during some of the time when the Grand Armée was sitting out here at Calais or wherever, before going off and getting frozen out in Russia. Period. And so, yeah, maybe they're going to build enough balloons and they're going to, fly through the air and invade, or maybe they're going to dig a tunnel and invade that way. But he was sure that they weren't going to be invading by sea. And this is before maybe this is before that. No, this is before Trafalgar. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's sort of about that time period. Yeah. So, this is what the British Admiralty is looking at and considering, in the idea that they cannot contemplate, think of the idea that they're going to allow Britain to be invaded. And to achieve this goal, they're going to have the Navy. Everything else, and before World War I, there was no RAF. So as the Army, they need an army. Got colonial empires. Even with not considering that, they still maintain an army at home. They got Jacobites and other people that are doing uprisings, but it's never a primary focus of Britain. It's the Navy, because they don't want to be invaded, so they're going to maintain a Navy that will defeat all comers. And that's what they do. So they have to. And so Germany, we can look at France. France, 1900, let's say. They worry about Spain invading? Really? The monarchy, I think, around 1900 isn't there anymore. I'm sort of confused at the collapse of the Spanish monarchy. But there's sort of two different claimants to the Spanish monarchy. Both are Bourbon claimants, and that is the old French royal house, although France, of course, is a republic at this time. So they're not really worried about a Spanish invasion. And also remember, Spain mostly got its butt kicked by the pipsqueak Americans. Yeah, that's over in the colonies. America was not set up in any way capable of landing troops in Spain and effectively doing much of anything at that time. Fighting the Spaniards out in their colonial possessions in Cuba, the Philippines, certainly not home at Spain, but still, they're not in 1900, they're not a major threat to France. Italy, fairly new country in 1900, because Garibaldi only recently had united it. Thank you, sirens. So or Italy, yeah, okay, we got to, build some fortifications. Things might sort of happen. They, at some point, joined the Central Powers. So, yeah, but where are they worried about? They're worried about Germany. And they've recently, the Franco-Prussian War, had their capital occupied and defeated basically all the relatively new but long-standing problems, with the Prussians and the Habsburgs. Because Germany is also just recently united. So Germany is a big threat. So they have to do, worry about that front, and they've had to for generations. But Germany, you got to realize, yeah, we say Germany, but that's still a new concept, and there's still a real functioning kingdom of Bavaria as part of the German Empire, and there are other kingdoms and principalities and whatnot are functioning, like Hesse and other places have functioning armies. Yes, these armies have agreed to, say, standardized weaponry, standardized calibers, but they are functionally their own institutions. I believe, Rommel, I'm pretty sure, is, a Bavarian officer in the Bavarian army, not a Prussian officer in the Prussian army. Hope I'm not getting that wrong. And so, it's not likely that Germany's going to, embrace a civil war and fracture and go fight each other, but they're not really any unified thing yet. But they do have a general sort of concept of that, but they're long-standing. So it's really sort of a Prussian monarchy. And the state of Prussia, East and West and all that combined, is the largest territory within the German Empire. And geographically, well, I would say it's at least a third of the German Empire. So it's really sort of the Prussian Empire, but to sort of be inclusive, to use sort of a modern term, they're calling it the German one instead of the Prussian one, because you have the Habsburg Empire, and with the rise of various nationalisms, they're setting up the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So Germany still has the threat of Austria. Yeah, they beat them in the little war over, Denmark kind of thing, to sort of drive them out of the, finally drive them out of what had been the Holy Roman Empire sort of agreement, and that Austria is not part of Germany. But they've got Austria as a potential threat. They have Russia. They have France. So they're looking at threats from all sides. And they build a high seas fleet. And yes, we're still talking about the high seas fleet. And they build a high seas fleet to have an empire. And all they're able to do is, pick up Tanganyika. Tanganyika, it's mildly valuable. It's not unvaluable. It has resources, if economically done. And I think the Germans were that profitable, but not hugely profitable. They're not like set up and growing all kinds of spices like in Sri Lanka or Indonesia or in the Americas or something like that. They are planting some rubber plants, but they're not making huge amounts of profit off of rubber or whatever it might be that you can find in other parts of the world. So it's not super profitable. Cameroon? Well, you're no longer doing slave things. I mean, Germany never really did, to the best of my knowledge. Ever were involved in the slave trades, even in their occupations of Africa. So, yeah, not a whole lot profitable. There may be some gold or something along that part of Cameroon, but not a whole lot. And it's much worse, at least from a European perspective, much worse of an environment, much more unhealthy, much more jungly. Because if you look at Tanganyika, most of that is not what we would call jungle. It's savannas. There's some foresty areas, but most of the jungle is sort of the other side of Lake Tanganyika and getting into the Congo. And I'm sure along the shores it might sort of seem that way, but it's more I'm familiar because of reading and knowing a few people that fought in the Rhodesian Wars. It's more the bush. Now, may not be, what we're thinking of, European bush, European, countryside, but it's the bush. It's much more like we see in Kenya, where they have the Great Rift Valley. There's a lot of that stuff, and so there's elements of jungle-ish stuff there, but a lot more. It's not nearly as widespread and dense. And there are some maybe in the south of it, getting more towards Mozambique, is a bit more jungly, going into, like I say, jumping the other side. But where Cameroon is sort of the jungle. And Togo, which is a very minor, we claimed this river and the banks of the river going up there. And eventually then gets mapped out and settled with the neighbors, but that's just a minor thing. And then, Britain has Wavis Bay along the southwest African coast, but you haven't claimed all the rest of that desert? We'll take the desert. And now Wavis Bay ends up sort of being some of the main diamond fields there, but Southwest Africa, outside of that, Germans pick up some diamond fields, but it's not really that good. And we got a few islands out in the Pacific. It grows a few things that we can maybe sort of kind of encourage the locals to plant and grow in a profitable scale to then try to bring back to Europe, but not much. I mean, Japan eventually, once they've sort of woken up, won it just only really as a strategical, control of the area. So Germany's just sort of picking up the last of the colonies, and they can do that without going, we need a bunch of dreadnoughts to fight Britain. Just go, Britain, we go to war with Britain. You're sort of on your own out there, colonies, and if things get too bad, just surrender, kind of thing. It's just sort of, because Germany and Britain, can go, it's going to be a civilized war, and if the colony, if there's big British invasion columns moving into your colony out there, just surrender. We'll negotiate after the war. Who gets what? If we won, we'll get it back and maybe add some territory. If we lose, you'll just come home, or you can change your citizenship or whatever. Just sort of like write it off, but have naval power to protect trade and whatnot from, the pesky Dutch or somebody, or the Russians or whatever, who are also sort of, they were, had Alaska for a while and are looking more out in the far Pacific along their coastline and expanding there, to have some fleet, and of course have a fleet to sort of bang about the Baltic, but not putting the expense in it. And, I just think, and so it's just a waste, because all of that resources that they put into that fleet, yes, it diverts a lot of British resources, because Britain has to man its fleet, has to train its fleet to keep up to good skills, and needs to sit there. Now, they don't have to keep building, big battleships, because they're just not a need. So they don't have to do that as the war is going on. I don't know if they do that, but they don't have to now. Of course, because of the submarine menace, they are, one scale or another, are building destroyers and other anti-submarine warfare boats. They're setting up convoy missions. Now they decide to, because some of the transatlantic liners are so fast that no submarine can catch them. I mean, no submarine at this time, and basically through World War II, can catch a surface vessel of any sort of moderate speed, because there are really slow merchant vessels, but any sort of moderate speed vessel while it's submerged. You can't catch them. Now, you can sort of sit out here. Well, no, let's sit out here somewhere and wait for them to come through your zone of operations, and then see them coming, try to move to intercept. But you can't chase them and catch them, is sort of the meaning. And so things like, the Lusitania and other vessels that are moving around, they're supposed to be zigzagging, they're supposed to be doing other things to make it just really hard. And so even if you go and see them, oh, they're coming this way, great. Well, we've got, it's just going to be stupid bad luck that you're going to literally just trip across them. Where if they are, sort of out there, but you're moving really fast, you're sort of coming across them, but to actually get close enough to get in there and sink it is just really difficult. And you probably have to do it on the surface, and then they see you on the surface, and then of course, what do? Change direction and keep, powering fast away from you, faster than you can even conceive of moving as a submarine. Not faster than a destroyer or something, but so it just there's a few that are really fast that are speed demons across the Atlantic, and so those are done on their own. But most vessels, including a lot of passenger stuff, are done in convoys that are mildly well protected. I mean, they're losing some vessels, but it's a thing, and obviously Germany does do effective use of the submarine, but it's not an entire field day or without. They're just not able to get that over there in time. British tanker was the AI just think, oh, well, we have to defend Britain. I don't know. And we have no tanks yet either. I wonder if they'd put that and pushed us back with it. That would have saved France from collapsing. Okay, so I guess enough talk about the fleet, and I think it's at the size and scale that it was built and then maintained during the war, it was useless. My evaluation here is the AI doesn't know not to move troops into pockets. Maybe I should make a special video for Bill and the crew on that. Because we would see things like the AI, and we also see this on the Ludendorff campaign, moving units into here, like, oh yeah, we're just in here, and the Germans are 3 units around them, squares, and we also had a lot of that happening down here, that they kept moving units into pockets and getting them destroyed. And when you can, especially like here is terrible, because when you do the shift and do this, you can do max 2 attacks from each hex. But if you have some place like that open, you do your first attack here and then move him back out, and then move, say, him in here and attack, he would still maybe have enough action points for one more swap out here. So you can, I think, get to 3 attacks from a province. And then if you have something like artillery here, you can just pound that. And so you can just sit here. To some degree, what Germany actually did do is sort of go on the strategic defensive and try to bleed the enemy who's attacking them white, while trying to make sort of strategic probes around and useful attacks, but without what we see with the Allies, that are much more vigorously trying to push them back into Germany. And so if the AI had tried better to do this, maintain a straight line somewhere along here, and of course it has to hold Paris, and try to hold some of the, eventually it wasn't able to hold Verdun even, but try to do a straight line kind of thing. It gets it to where you can have, if you're dug in, you can have only a certain number of attacks. So yeah, between switching out, getting them around. And if you can't fully kill the units, they can just come back and you can swap them out and get them back to full strength. But we maximized our sort of passive aggressive attacks against them. I don't know how well my whole plan would work against a human, and you may get to see that someday. So yeah. And similarly, the AI just now again, it's somewhat historical. Italy's war goal, as my understanding, I'm not an expert on World War One or Italy in World War One, but Italy's war goal was sort of Trieste, and this whole peninsula here they wanted, and maybe much more of the Adriatic coast, but definitely sort of Trieste and cutting the Austrian part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire off from the sea. I don't know practically how big their war goal was down the coast, but they definitely did get some little bits and pieces of territory down here. And so I get why they were on an offensive-minded situation, because win or lose the war, if you haven't done some relative advancements into your war goal regions, and you don't look like you've been a helpful enough enemy, meaning you just sort of go to war, entrench yourself behind this river, the Anzanzo, I believe is the name of the river. Entrench yourself behind it and then just sit there, and entrench yourself, around the mountains and just sit there. Yeah, the Allies, even if they won, they might not be so like, yay, let's give them lots of territory. Because what did they do? They tied up some troops, but it's not really much. And if it's sort of a quiet front that whenever you need more troops down to, say, fighting in Romania or something, you just quickly load up a corps on the train, so corps two that are sort of the reserves to the front, ship them out here, and whenever you have a corps or two that are really beaten up badly, you move them over here to be sort of reserve corps that you slowly work back into place. It's not that bad of an inconvenience, but it still is. So yeah, some of that stuff, war goals, Italy must expand into Trieste. But we can also look at their method of moving into the front. It was either by insta first, deployment placement on the map, coming out of it, or it was zipping in unit like that, strategically redeploying it to the front and sticking it in unentrenched, and so that it was unable to withstand attacks. Had they moved a unit like that to the front, I'm guessing it would have the action points to be able to entrench after that. Had you done that, that might have, when I say might, have been able to withstand my attacks and bleed me. So I don't know. And that's sort of what we see here. Well, I guess this is going to, obviously this is the end of this series. We will be continuing our Ludendorff offensive, and I do want to also clean up the East Front first, which we won the East Front earlier on the West Front first series, which is interesting, because I definitely put more units early on into the West Front offensive than I did on the East, but we won in the East earlier by date on the calendar. And we won the war earlier by date on the calendar. I do believe it's by date. And so, the West Front first ended the Eastern Front first. And we still have the Eastern Front to deal with on the West Front, because we were been much more passive on the West Front for the East Front first. So we'll see how all that goes. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate all you who watch all these videos. It means a lot. So thanks so much, everyone.